for myself, it's absolutely my favorite thing to do to try to bring some useful insights from the field of linguistics to the service of people who are actually doing the work of the courts. So, what we're going to talk about today is little words that cause a lot of big trouble in ambiguity, the form of ambiguity, all, not, and, things like that. These are sort of the unsung heroes of workhorses that don't get a lot of attention. If language were a movie, these would not be the stars of the show. They would be like the director and the person who blocks the scene and the person who arranges the structure of the movie. So the difficulty is they're really hard to think about. And even people who, like Liz and I, between us, we have 60 years of experience between us looking at these phenomena, it's still hard to think about them. So what we have teed up are some images and some interactive material in the hopes of making things clear. So I also want to say, I have listened to a lot of academic talks where I suspected that the person who was giving the talk didn't really care whether I got anything out of it or not. And we are trying to break that mold. So we really want to offer you something that we hope will be useful to you. So this presentation comes with a warranty of sorts. And that in this session, our commitment to you is that we intend that you will see a pattern of seemingly unrelated cases that we'll talk about, get acquainted with something we're calling the square of litigation, which is a tool for clarifying legal disputes over these little words. Get a workout. We're going to make you work. Workout in detecting hard to spot ambiguities. Smile at least once. And take away a versatile diagram to apply to the next similar kind of case or to a drafting problem that you might encounter. So that's what we're going for. We can't give you your time back if we fail to deliver on any of these commitments, but we will if you feel that we have failed to deliver on any of our commitments. Please write your name down on the piece of paper in the middle, and you will be entered into a drawing to win this bag of chocolate. So you do business. I don't think Judicial Independence has chocolate. You can do a great place. Okay. So let's move into the substance here. Okay, we're first going to talk about the combination of not and all and not and Excited? All right, but we're going to start with a familiar ambiguity. I don't know if you've noticed the ambiguity in the home on the range at the end. And skies are not cloudy all day. Do we have anybody from Kansas here? Kansas in the house? State song of Kansas, right? Well, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and I just realized 15 years ago that I've been understanding this line wrong for my entire life. There are two ways to hear this. Do you hear it? Okay, one is that all day it's not cloudy. The other way is that it's not the case that it's cloudy all day, like where I'm from. So I'm pretty sure that Kansas is bragging about sun on the range all the time, but I thought they were bragging about sunbreaks. So what we're going to do, this is important because we need a name for these two kinds of readings. We're going to call this one full negation, and that's going to be a big piece of what we're talking about. We're going to call this one partial negation. And so Liz and I see patterns in cases where this distinction comes up over and over and over again in cases that you wouldn't think are similar because they have different words in them. All right, so let's get some practice looking at full and partial negation. First of all, let's do another example with not all. I didn't see all the signs that this relationship was doomed. Can you hear that, the ambiguity in that? Let's look at what the readings would be. Full negation. I saw none of the signs. I was blissfully unaware, which is probably what they mean. Or, I missed some signs, right? None versus some not. Here's another one from a legal provision. If the court finds the juvenile did not commit all of the alleged delinquent acts, the court shall dismiss the petition and release the juvenile. Hear it both ways? Full negation, the juvenile committed none of the acts. Partial, there's one that they didn't commit. So you have to think about which one of those makes more sense. Okay, now, the thing is, not up works exactly the same way. You have the same two readings, even though it's a different word. For example, the delivery person didn't deliver a pizza last night. So, what's that? Full negation. They delivered no pizzas last night. There were no pizzas that they delivered. Partial negation, there was a pizza that they didn't deliver. One of them out of, they may have delivered plenty of other ones. Another one, on his way home, Joe didn't stop at a red light. Do we think that means full negation? Joe blew through every red light on the way home. We hope that's implausible. Partial negation, probably what was meant. There was a red light that Joe didn't stop for. Okay, so the point is to see that all of these sentences are ambiguous in exactly the same way. They have the same two kinds of readings. And let's just investigate briefly why this ambiguity? Well, because these function words act like operations in math. They don't act like the content words of the sentence. They're structuring the logic of the sentence. They're like the connective tissue that holds the rest of it together. And so when you have operations in math, like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, it of course matters what order you do them as to what kind of answer you get. And it's the same thing in English, but unlike in math, we don't have an order of operations in English. So the interaction of these operations can result in different logical structures of the sentence, which is how we get this full or partial negation thing. So for example, you could put not cloudy in parentheses and say all day it's not cloudy for full negation, or cloudy all day and then negate it for partial negation. So it's really just like arithmetic in that way, and Liz's line of work is to formalize all of this stuff as a formal semanticist. All right, how do we choose between these readings? Well, it's not going to be from the language, from the grammar on the face of it, because that's the ambiguous stuff. We have to use, not surprisingly, context, just like we were doing in thinking about the examples of like blowing through all of the red lights on the way home. I saw you smiling about that. So there's one check for us, right? Okay, now, there is an elephant in the room. I don't know if you can see the elephant in the room. It's very faint there. But the response might be, hang on, isn't not all, when we say not all, usually partial negation? By that I mean, if I say I did not eat all the cookies, then I probably mean it's not the case that I ate all the cookies. I got one for you. Would be less common that would mean I ate none of the cookies. Similarly, isn't not usually full negation? So for example, if I say I don't have a cat, then I mean I have no cat. I'm catless, cat-free. Now, you really understand full and partial negation if you can figure out what the partial negation reading of I don't have a cat is. And I see you laughing. There is some cat out there in the world that I don't have. I mean, I like cats a lot, but not that much. So you see, but that is an ambiguous sentence that we resolve because it doesn't make sense to tell somebody that you don't have all the cats in the world. No. Okay, so the answer to these questions is, yes, it is true that usually, and that we have a preference for not all being interpreted as partial negation, and not being interpreted as full negation, just like in those sentences there. But context can very easily trump this. Just tsunami the effect of the slight tilt, or the tilt that we have in that direction, and that happens a lot in law. Here's an example of context tilting that, when in the sentence I had before, I failed to stop for a stop sign. That sounds like the normal way to say it, even though it's the opposite of what you expect, right? It's not full negation, it's there's a stop sign I failed to stop for. And it sounded weird to say, I failed to stop for all stop signs, right? Because what you're doing is focusing the person, and focus has a lot to do with this, on a particular stop sign that you didn't stop for. All right. Now, full negation, what is this medieval thing? Well, this is where we get into this tool that we hope will be useful for you. And the thing is, we can't take credit for it. It's really an ancient concept going right all the way back to Aristotle, as many things do. It's a way of organizing the basic ways that any two categories can interact with one another. And this is a medieval version of it. And we're going to talk about it in the corners of the square, but I'll just note those little crisscrosses, because that's going to be really interesting in how lawyers talk past each other when they have different interpretations of ambiguous sentences. So the square looks like this. We've got plus and minus on the top, and partial and full on the side. So the four possibilities for the interactions between categories, I just picked dogs and friendly things, okay? So if I have a sentence, hard for you to see in the back, but look at the image and you'll get it. The sentence, all dogs are friendly, right? That's this full affirmation. Everything in the dog circle is in the friendly circle. On the other side, full negation is no dogs are friendly. There's no overlap between friendly and dogs. And we're going to call that full negation. Now on the bottom, partial affirmation, what this stands for, this image, is some dogs are friendly. There's at least some dog in the overlap, namely this one, between friendly things and dogs. And then on the other side, some dogs are not friendly, namely this one. And this, of course, we're going to call partial negation, because we're used to that by now. All right, so I'm gonna color code full negation as red, and partial negation is yellow, like stop and slow down, just to make it easy to remember. But in order to get to what we're calling the square of litigation, which is specifically for law and litigation and legal disputes, I need to tee it up with a case. And the case is really complicated, but I'm going to try to make it really simple. I don't know if you've heard of this case, Carico v. Novo Nordisk, a 2012 Supreme Court case. But we had a brand new drug, Novo Nordisk, and Carico, and they're both selling a diabetes drug. Novo had the patent on the diabetes drug, but the drug patent expired, but they still have a patent on the method of use for it. Carico just wants to market this drug for a method of use that's not in Novo's patent, another FDA use. So what does this look like? Well, here's the interaction of these two categories. Novo brand's patent on the left here. This includes the method of use that they have patented is the use of this drug with metformin to treat diabetes. And FDA-approved uses also include using this drug by itself, which is what the generic Carico wants to market the drug for, just for this use. So it sure looked like non-infringement, right? But I'll skip past all of the regulatory vortex that this loophole that this fell into. And generic is really tangled up in litigation, but the way they could get out of it, the way they could win, is if the patent, Novo's patent, does not claim an approved method of using the drug. With me? So, true or false? Novo's patent does not claim an approved method of using the drug. Well, the parties really disagreed about this on that fault line of full and partial negation. So let's see what this looks like then, what we'll call the square of litigation. So this is where I think we need my pointer. Speaking of, where's your phone? Do you have a pointer? That's one maybe I don't have it. All right, so I'm just gonna gesture. All right, so our question was, does the patent, here's the question, Novo's patent does not claim an approved method of using the drug. Yes or no? Well, Novo Nordisk says, that means full negation. That is paraphrased as, our patent claims no FDA-approved method of using the drug. But look, our patent does claim an FDA-approved method of using the drug. There is some use that's patented. So we win. Carrico says, wait a minute, that's not the way to understand it at all. This Novo's patent doesn't claim an approved method is partial negation. What we have to show is that there's some method of use. Some use is not patented, namely the one that we want to market this drug for. So that was their disagreement. And just notice here, this is what I mean by the square of litigation. Novo's point is that they are, this is what the statute means, they win if this is true, if this describes the circumstances, and they only lose if all uses are patented. Whereas Carrico is saying, no, this full negation is what the statute means, and we lose under, if that's the case, but we win if the opposite corner is true. So what this shows is the square of negation, the opposite corners, one of them has to be true and they can't both be true. And so those represent the litigation positions in all of these cases. They disagree about full and partial negation, and they disagree about the exactly opposite corners of the conditions under which they went. So I think with that, we're ready to put you through some practice at distinguishing full and partial negation. You should have 4 cards and 4 labels. I think it will be self-explanatory. The goal is to try to hear both readings first. Each card has an ambiguous sentence on it with 2 readings, and the cards flip over. One reading is represented on one side, the other on the other side. So a paraphrase on that card, on one side of the card, or a question will point you to which reading you're supposed to identify and label there. So use the round labels, the red ones are full negation and partial negation. So each card should end up with a red label on one side and a yellow label on the other side. Some of them are difficult. If you get stuck, try flipping the card over and talking with each other to compare the readings. The other thing you can do is, do we have those square litigation things? If we didn't have them for everybody, but yes, you might find that that's useful to map out what the parties we fight about. Okay, so do 1 and 2 first, because those are the ones that most are here. Liz is going to talk a little bit about 3 and 4. But just see if you can talk amongst yourselves and come to perhaps agreeing on it. So just being aware. This is just scratching the surface, of course. And I'm so glad that you're still talking. Like, I mean, I'm supposed to tell you, oh, let's get back together, but I kind of want you to just keep interacting. But let's just do a quick debrief here, just with my cheat sheet. So, on side A is the health insurance one. The health insurer elects not to renew all group health policies in the state. Reading A is there's at least one group health policy in the state that the insurer elects not to renew. That's one possible reading of that. Any takers for whether you put a yellow sticker or a red sticker on that? This is great. Yellow sticker, partial negation, right? And on the other side, we've got the health insurer elects to renew no group health policies in the state. That's full negation, which is to say the health insurer elects to just get out of that state's market. And indeed, from context, that's pretty evidently what the preferred interpretation is. The next one is a little whimsical. If you do not declare an item listed in a customs form that you have in your possession, then you may be detained at U.S. Customs. So our scenario is Roy coming back from Switzerland with 2 kilos of gold bullion and a Lufthansa cheese sandwich in his luggage. He declares the sandwich. Which reading would keep Roy out of trouble? This is a little bit tricky one because it doesn't give you the paraphrase. Which reading would Roy argue this if you do not declare an item in your bag? Is it more like, I didn't stop at a stop sign, or I don't have a patent? I didn't declare an item in my bag. Any takers? Color sticker? Yeah. Red. Yep, exactly. He wants to say, look, I can only get in trouble if I didn't declare anything that I have. I declared the cheese sandwich, so let me do a bullion. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Liz. Thank you, everybody. It was just a pleasure to see you. Kind of attending to that.
There you go. Okay. All right. So, we hope we have convinced you that the square of litigation can be used for combinations of negation with indefinites like and universal quantifiers, as we say in business, like all. And we would like to convince you that the square of litigation can also be applied to combinations of negation with conjunction and disjunction and or. Okay, so let's start with sort of an everyday example. Consider the sentence, Sally didn't go to work on Monday and Tuesday. This can be heard in 2 different ways, and these 2 different ways can be brought out by different continuations of the sentence. So you could say, Sally didn't go to work on Monday and Tuesday because she was in Florida those 2 days. So that's full negation, she went neither day, and we can schematize that with not Monday and not Tuesday. Or you could continue, Sally didn't go to work on Monday and Tuesday, but at least she did go on Monday, right? That wouldn't be a contradiction. And we can schematize that reading with negation scoping over conjunction, as we say in business. So you have a conjunction and then you just negate that. Okay, so these are 2 different readings that are generated by the grammar for this sentence, which has a negation and conjunction. Okay, same 2 readings arise with the combination of negation and disjunction. So consider Sally didn't go to work on Monday or Tuesday. You could continue that because she was in Florida those 2 days, right? So it means full negation, neither Monday nor Tuesday. And we can schematize that reading. It is not the case that she went on Monday or Tuesday. So negation scoping over disjunction, right? A scope ambiguity. Or you could continue, but I can't remember which. Sally didn't go to work on Monday or Tuesday, but I can't remember which. And that reading can be schematized not Monday or not Tuesday. Okay, so both of these sentences have a scope ambiguity in them, and that scope ambiguity generates the exact same 2 readings. They cash out as full and partial negation. Okay, and there's a rule of propositional logic, a rule that applies to fully disambiguated, clearly bracketed sentences of a formal language, propositional logic, that says if you conjoin 2 negations, that's the same thing as negating a disjunction. So not Monday and not Tuesday is equivalent to not Monday or Tuesday. That's one of De Morgan's laws. Another one of De Morgan's laws is the negation of a conjunction, not Monday and Tuesday, is equivalent to either not Monday or not Tuesday. So like in more natural language, both not is equivalent to neither nor, not both is equivalent to one is missing. Okay. Now, so De Morgan's laws create a kind of apparent equivalence between and sentences and or sentences. And this is sort of almost correctly addressed by Scalia and Garner in their text on legal interpretation. They say that the principle that not A, B, or C means not A, not B, and not C is part of what is called De Morgan's theorem. And as we've kind of just already seen, this is not correct and it is misleading. But they're kind of onto something important here. One important thing that is different about De Morgan's laws and what they say is that De Morgan's laws apply to unambiguous formulas that have brackets on them already, whereas English sentences don't have that, and they are ambiguous. So there's no one reading that is correct. There's an ambiguity. So not A, B, or C has two readings, and on one reading, it's equivalent to not A, not B, and not C. So you do get that kind of and or equivalence, but only on one reading. And by the same token, not A, B, and C has a reading. It can mean not A, not B, or not C. So it has a partial negation reading. So it's on one of the scope readings that you get this equivalence, this and or equivalence. Okay, all right. So now we're going to apply this to a case involving not and conjunction. This is on slide card 3. Okay, so the real situation that we have here is one where Larry provided care to his children, but he didn't provide financial support. So which of the readings is correct? So should we just go straight to the debrief now, since we have so little time?
Yeah, why don't we do that, right? You can look at them.
Okay, so take a look at card 3, and we'll just kind of talk through it.
Do you need them?
It's okay. I think it's okay. We can do this.
You're probably, I forget. You're in the business.
So it's very simple. It's like Larry, care, and support it. Okay. So here's our square of litigation for this case. In this corner, we have full affirmation. Larry provided both care and support. That stands in litigatory opposition to the partial negation reading. There's something on that list, care and support, that he didn't provide. If this partial negation reading is the one that we take to interpret the law, then what's bad is Larry failing to provide at least one of those things, and what's the opposite of that is that he provides all of those things. So failing to provide all of those things is the bad thing. If we take the full negation reading, Larry provided neither thing, then the litigatory opposition relation goes like this. This is a bad thing, and he's okay if there's at least something that he provided, okay? So the situation is that he did provide care. So he could say, well, I provided care. He could say, well, I provided care. And I'm taking this full negation reading, so I win and you lose. The government is saying it's bad if there is a required thing that you didn't provide, so he loses under this one, right? So depending on whether we take a full negation reading or a partial negation reading, you get different litigatory opposition relations, right? If you take this reading, then the litigatory opposition reading goes on this diagonal, the litigatory opposition goes on this diagonal, otherwise it's this diagonal. So when the dispute is happening, they're literally talking across each other. Same kind of deal for card 4. The situation was that they provided notice under 2, but not under 1. So which was it? Are we over here in this corner where you have partial affirmation, which is the opposite of full negation, or are we in this one where partial negation is true? Okay. There's another case involving the interaction between negation and Boolean connectives. This one has 3 conjuncts. So there's no mandatory minimum sentence if several things. First thing, the defendant does not have A, B, and C is how it's written. And it's kind of interesting that it's formatted in this way with these separate bullet points. Okay, so does that mean he has none, or does it mean there is something that he doesn't have? Okay,
The reality in this situation is that he had A and B, but didn't have C. Okay, so the full negation reading is false. In virtue of the fact that there is something on the list that he did have. The partial negation reading is true in virtue of this thing that he, so the full negation reading is false in virtue of the fact that there was something that he had. The partial negation reading is true in virtue of C, this thing that he didn't have, right? So depending on whether we take the full negation reading or the partial negation reading, he will win or lose. So if you read the opinion, there's a lot of good stuff happening in the discussion. So Kagan clearly identifies the full negation reading and expresses it quite elegantly. So she writes, in the government's view, and connects 3 criminal history conditions, all of which must be satisfied to gain safety valve relief. In other words, the court must find that the defendant does not have A, does not have B, and does not have C. So there you see clearly the full negation reading being articulated. And then she articulates the partial negation reading as follows. Under Pulsler's reading, the word and joins 3 features of a defendant's criminal history into a single disqualifying characteristic. Accordingly, a defendant is ineligible, so there you have the not, for the safety valve only if he has the items listed in subparagraphs A, B, and C in combination. So you can hear the partial negation being described by Kagan here. And she correctly says each of these readings is possible in the abstract. The choice between the 2 can sensibly be made only by examining the content, including what they say, how they relate to each other, and how they fit together with other pertinent law. And it turns out that if you look at it carefully, if you take one of the readings, then the law would be superfluous. And so you have to do that kind of close examination of the case. It's not true what Gorsuch says, that there is one reading that is what it says, okay? He writes in his dissent, in the lower court proceedings, the government admitted that this new test is most naturally read to mean what it says. A defendant may be eligible for individualized sentencing unless he possesses all 3 listed traits, A, B, and C. Despite its admission that it is most naturally read this way, the government urges us to adopt a different construction. It asks us to read the First Step Act as promising a defendant a chance at an individualized sentencing only when he does not have any of the 3 listed traits, A, B, or C. So he's saying the government is asking us to read this and as or. And he uses this construction that you see often in legal writing concerning scope ambiguities. If they had meant or, they would have said or, right? But this is wrong. This is a pernicious and pervasive fallacy in legal writing that we hope you all will go forth and try to cease. That pattern of reasoning doesn't make any sense because not A, B, or C is also itself ambiguous between full and partial negation. And there is no one reading that is what it says, right? So we would like to urge an end to this kind of argumentation that sounds like if they had meant X, they would have used Y instead of Z. This is very silly when both Y and Z are ambiguous, right? If Z is also ambiguous, then we can't use it to disambiguate. And furthermore, we can't expect drafters to be sensitive to the scope possibilities of what they write. Just look at the Scalia and Garner tone, where they are attempting to bring clarity to the distinction between what they call the conjunctive and the disjunctive readings, not helpful labels. And so they say the conjunctive reading is to be eligible, you must prove that you have not A, B, and C. That's also ambiguous. To be eligible, you must prove that you have not A, B, or C, also ambiguous. And then they explicate this distinction by saying with the conjunctive negative proof, you must prove that you did not do all three. And now you all can hear, right, that this itself is ambiguous, right? And so it's very striking that in an attempt to disambiguate among the two readings, they used a paraphrase that was itself ambiguous. And so that's why we think that it is unreasonable to expect drafters to be able to foresee the ambiguity. And therefore this fallacy, if they had meant X, they would have said Y instead of Z, is not a good way to go. We would like to urge an end to this kind of reasoning, and we would also like to urge an end to this appeal to ordinary meaning in the interpretation of sentences involving these two operators, not and one of these other guys like and or some and all. And at the same time, we're not saying sometimes and means or and sometimes or means and. And means and. But due to the fact that there is scope ambiguity and due to De Morgan's laws, sentences with not and end up equivalent on one of their readings to sentences with not and or. Okay, our takeaway messages include, number one, negation interacts with words like and or, and some, and all, to produce ambiguities between full and partial negation, and you can use this square of litigation to kind of ground your sense of what's happening with these two readings. And scope flexibility of the kind that we see in the interaction between these two operators it's actually a design feature in natural language. If we didn't have this kind of flexibility, we would have to have very long sentences, the kind of long sentences that you see in formal logics, and we would need brackets. It's due to the fact that we have this kind of interpretive flexibility that we can have a very concise and short code. And we are using natural language in law. And so it's kind of something that we have to live with, although we can raise our awareness of the scope possibilities and reduce the ambiguity to some extent. All right, that's all I think.
Thank you. Well, we're coming to our time. We might have time for maybe one or two questions. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
Are there ways for a drafter to make it clear? I mean, other than using longer sentences?
So the question is, are there ways for the drafter to make language clearer other than using very long sentences?
Yeah, I can say, you saw all of the paraphrases that we gave, using none is one way. In general, it tends to work pretty well to bump something up to the front of the sentence, like there is one that is not, instead of, I'm trying to think of some of the paraphrases. There was a red light that I didn't stop for example. That there is often a way to get around the ambiguity of partial negation. So thinking about that sort of structure. But it's hard because we don't notice it.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Oh, here's one in the back.
Yeah, so how does this negation work with instructions like affirmative bonus or plus no plus object? Like, is that subject to depending on the same ambiguities that we're talking about? For example,
Is this my turn? Alright, so you could have something like, I saw no mistakes, right? That is unambiguous, yes, and that's also very concise. So that's a good way to unambiguously capture full negation. I didn't see no mistakes. Depends which dialect you're using, if it's one with negative concord or not. But standard English does not have negative concord, so then that would be. It is not the case that I saw no mistakes.
Okay, I'd love to thank the panel. This has been very helpful.